Today we're going to explore a fascinating question in neuroscience. Why do some people generate tons of ideas but struggle to execute them? We'll look at the brain systems involved, run some calculations, and understand the science behind ideation versus implementation. Let's start with a common observation. You probably know someone who's bursting with creative ideas but rarely finishes projects. Or maybe that's you. This isn't a character flaw. It's rooted in how different brain systems operate. Meet Alice. She generates about 50 ideas per month. That's 600 ideas per year. But she only completes 2 major projects annually. That's a completion rate of 0.33%. Now meet Bob. He generates only 5 ideas per month, 60 per year. But he completes 10 projects annually. That's a 16.7% completion rate, 50 times higher than Alice. Alice's completion rate, 2 divided by 600 equals 0.33%. Bob's rate, 10 divided by 60 equals 16.7%. Why such a dramatic difference? The answer lies in distinct neural systems that support ideation versus execution. The first key system is the default mode network, or DMN. This is your brain's ideation engine. The DMN includes the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, temporal parietal junction, and hippocampus. These regions are highly interconnected. The DMN activates when you're not focused on the external world, during mind-wandering, daydreaming, imagining future scenarios, and spontaneous thought. Here's something remarkable. Your brain is only 2% of your body weight, but consumes 20% of your body's energy. Much of this goes to DMN activity. If you consume 2,000 kilocalories per day, your brain uses 400 kilocalories daily. That's equivalent to running for about 40 minutes. The DMN generates ideas by recombining memories, experiences, and concepts in novel configurations. It's essentially a pattern mixing machine. Let me ask you a question. If your brain stores roughly 1 quadrillion synaptic connections encoding memories and concepts, how many potential novel combinations could theoretically exist? If we just look at combinations of 3 concepts from 10 to the 15 possibilities, we get approximately 10 to the 44th potential combinations. That's more combinations than atoms in your body. The combinatorial space is essentially infinite. Your DMN can generate ideas faster than you could ever execute them. This is why Alice generates so many ideas. Now let's look at the second system, the task positive network, or TPN. This is your execution engine. The TPN includes the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, intraparietal sulcus, frontal eye fields, and motor regions. These handle focused attention and goal-directed action. The TPN activates when you're engaged in focused external tasks, programming, writing, solving math problems, building something physical. Here's a crucial finding. The DMN and TPN are anti-correlated. When one is active, the other tends to be suppressed. They operate like a seesaw. Think of it like a seesaw. When the DMN is up and active generating ideas, the TPN is down and inactive. When you switch to execution mode, the TPN goes up and the DMN goes down. Studies show correlation coefficients between DMN and TPN activity ranging from -0.7 to -0.9. This is a very strong inverse relationship. Now we arrive at a critical problem, the switching cost. Moving between ideation and execution modes isn't free. Every time you switch from idea generation to focused execution, your brain needs to reconfigure neural networks. This takes energy and time. Research suggests the switching cost is roughly 15 to 25 minutes per transition. That's how long it takes to fully settle into deep focus or deep ideation. Remember Alice? She switches modes about 10 times per day, jumping between ideas and attempts at execution. Bob switches only twice, morning ideation, then sustained execution. Alice loses 10 times 20 equals 200 minutes per day to switching costs. That's 3 hours and 20 minutes of lost productivity daily. Bob loses only 2 times 20 equals 40 minutes per day. He has 2 hours and 40 minutes more productive time than Alice every single day. Over 250 working days, that's 160 minutes, times 250 equals 40,000 minutes, or 667 hours. Bob gets nearly 17 extra 40-hour work weeks per year. Let's introduce the third critical system, dopamine and reward prediction. This system determines what captures your attention and sustains your effort. The dopamine system, centered in the ventral tegmental area and nucleus accumbens, generates reward signals that motivate behavior. Here's what's fascinating. Dopamine neurons fire most strongly for novelty, surprise, and unpredictable rewards, not for predictable, sustained effort. Every new idea Alice generates triggers a dopamine release. It's novel, exciting, full of potential. Her brain rewards her for ideation. But execution? That's predictable, repetitive, often tedious. Hour 50 of coding the same project doesn't trigger the same dopamine response as imagining project number 51. Let's say generating a new idea produces a dopamine spike of 100% above baseline. Execution hour 1 might give you 30% above baseline because you're making visible progress. But execution hour 50? Maybe 5% above baseline. The novelty is gone. You're in the slog. So here's our next question. If execution is inherently less rewarding dopaminergically, why can Bob sustain effort while Alice cannot? The answer involves individual differences in executive function strength, particularly in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex acts as a top-down control system. It can override the dopamine system's preference for novelty and enforce sustained attention on long-term goals. There's a constant conflict. The dopamine system provides bottom-up drive toward novelty. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex provides top-down control to stay focused on goals. Dorsolateral prefrontal cortex strength varies by approximately 40% across individuals, based on genetics, development, and training. We can measure this through working memory capacity tests, sustained attention tasks, and delay discounting paradigms. Let's say Bob's dorsolateral prefrontal cortex strength is 1.4 times Alice's. This 40% advantage makes a massive difference in execution ability. Let me give you a rough mathematical model for persistence. This is a simplification, but it captures the key dynamics. Persistence at time t equals d times reward function of t plus e times goal value minus c times time. Let me explain each term. D is dopamine sensitivity. How much does immediate reward influence your behavior? Alice has high D. R of t is the reward function at time t. This decreases as tasks become repetitive. Remember, it goes from 100% to 5%. E is executive function strength. How effectively can you override immediate impulses for long-term goals? Bob has high E. G is goal value. How much do you value actually completing this specific project? C is cost rate. The accumulating effort, frustration, and opportunity cost of continuing versus switching to a new exciting idea. When P of T drops below 0, you quit and your DMN generates a new shiny idea. This is what happens to Alice around hour 5 of every project. Let's put some realistic numbers into this equation and see what happens. For Alice, dopamine sensitivity equals 0.8. She's highly reward-driven. Executive function equals 0.4, relatively weak. Goal value equals 50. Cost rate equals 0.3 per hour. For Bob, dopamine sensitivity equals 0.5, more moderate. Executive function equals 0.8, quite strong. Goal value equals 50, same as Alice. Cost rate equals 0.2, he finds persistence less frustrating. Let's calculate persistence at t equals 5 hours into a project. Reward at hour 5 is about 20% of initial, so let's say 20 units. Alice's persistence, 0.8 times 20 plus 0.4 times 50 minus 0.3 times 5 equals 34.5. Still positive, she continues. Bob's persistence, 0.5 times 20 plus 0.8 times 50 minus 0.2 times 5 equals 49. Much stronger persistence. Now let's look at hour 50, deep into the execution phase. Reward at hour 50 is only 5% of initial, let's say 5 units. Alice's persistence, 0.8 times 5 plus 0.4 times 50 minus 0.3 times 50 equals 9. Barely positive. She's on the edge of quitting. Bob's persistence, 0.5 times 5 plus 0.8 times 50 minus 0.2 times 50 equals 32.5. Still quite strong. He'll finish. This mathematical framework explains why Bob completes 50 times more projects than Alice. His executive function strength carries him through the low dopamine execution phase. Now here's an important question. Is this fixed, or can Alice train her brain to execute better? The good news is that executive function is trainable. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex exhibits plasticity throughout life. Working memory training, mindfulness meditation, and deliberate practice of sustained focus can all strengthen executive function. Studies show improvement rates of 15 to 20% per year with consistent training. So Alice could increase her E-value from 0.4 to 0.46 within a year. A 15% increase in E would roughly double her persistence in the late stages. Her completion rate could go from 0.33% to around 0.6%. Still not Bob level, but meaningful improvement. Let me give you a practical strategy based on this neuroscience. It's called structured transitions. Phase 1. Allocate pure DMN ideation time. 30 minutes of mind wandering, brainstorming, no pressure to execute. Let ideas flow freely. Phase 2. Bring in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex for evaluation. 15 minutes to critically assess which idea has highest value and feasibility. Phase 3. Commit to one idea for extended execution. Minimum 4 hours of focused work. This minimizes switching costs and allows you to push through the low dopamine phase. Phase 4. Buffer time before next ideation. 1 hour of rest or different activity. This prevents premature switching when execution gets hard. Total cycle. 30 plus 15 plus 240 plus 60 equals 345 minutes, about 5.8 hours. You can do 1.5 cycles per workday. This structure honors both systems. You get creative ideation from the DMN, but then you leverage the TPN for sustained execution without excessive switching. There's one more critical factor we need to discuss. External accountability. This is Bob's secret weapon. External accountability essentially adds a new term to our persistence equation. Let's call it A for accountability pressure. Now persistence equals D times R of T, plus E times G, plus A times P, minus C times T, where P is the penalty for not delivering. Bob tells colleagues, friends, or clients about his projects. This creates social pressure. Breaking a promise to others carries a psychological cost. The accountability term can add 20 to 30 units of persistence. That's equivalent to increasing your executive function by 50%. Alice works in isolation. No one knows about her projects. When she quits at hour 5, there's no social cost. Her A times P equals 0. Finally, let's talk about environmental design. Your physical and digital environment dramatically affects which brain system dominates. On the left, a DMN activating environment. Phone nearby, multiple browser tabs, social media accessible, no clear goals. On the right, a TPN optimized environment. Phone in another room, single task, block distractions, clear objectives. Every notification, every open tab, every potential interruption is an invitation for your DMN to take over and generate a new idea, pulling you away from execution. Each interruption costs approximately 20 minutes of focus time. That's the switching cost to get back into deep TPN engagement. Bob eliminates 95% of potential interruptions during his execution blocks. Alice's environment has constant interruption potential. Let's bring this all together into a complete picture of why some people generate ideas but struggle with execution. 3 neural systems are in constant interaction. The default mode network for ideation, the task positive network for execution, and the dopamine system for motivation. These systems are anti-correlated. Switching between idea generation and execution carries a metabolic and time cost of 15 to 25 minutes per switch. Executive function strength, centered in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, varies by about 40% across individuals. This determines your ability to persist through low dopamine execution phases. The dopamine system inherently rewards novelty and surprise more than sustained, predictable effort. New ideas feel better than hour 50 of execution. The switching costs accumulate massively. A difference of 160 minutes per day equals 667 hours per year. equivalent to 17 work weeks. Environmental design and external accountability can partially compensate for weaker executive function, adding 20 to 30 persistence units. Executive function is trainable through working memory exercises and sustained attention practice, showing 15 to 20% improvement annually. The practical solution isn't to fight your neural architecture, but to design structured transitions that honor both ideation and execution modes while minimizing switching costs. Let me leave you with one final calculation. What's the optimal ratio of ideation to execution time? A rough formula. Optimal ratio equals E plus A divided by D times 1/10, where E is executive function strength, A is accountability, and D is dopamine sensitivity. For Alice with E equals 0.4, A equals 0, D equals 0.8, ratio equals 0.05, she should spend only 5% of time executing. This matches her behavior, mostly ideation. For Bob, with E equals 0.8, A equals 0.3, D equals 0.5, ratio equals 0.22. He should spend 22% of time executing, which means mostly execution mode. To increase your execution ratio, raise E through executive function training, raise A by creating accountability structures, or work on reducing D by becoming less reactive to immediate rewards. Here's my closing thought. There's nothing wrong with being an idea generator like Alice. The world needs both idea people and execution people. The problem only arises when your pattern causes personal distress or prevents you from achieving goals you genuinely care about. Understanding the neuroscience removes moral judgment and gives you concrete, evidence-based strategies. You're not lazy or undisciplined. You have a specific neural profile that can be worked with intelligently. Work with your brain's natural systems, not against them. Design environments, accountability structures, and schedules that minimize switching costs and maximize the strengths of your particular neural architecture.